Good morning. Let's all arrive here by taking 3 very deep inhales and slow exhales. So let's inhale and exhale to the bottom. Inhale and exhale. One more. Inhale and exhale. Thank you.
A warm welcome to all of those here and our Celestials online. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the white rose. Many of us knew and loved for many, many years Mary Nykirk, who left our earth on the 30th of November. For this lay-led service, we've invited into our conversation Erwin Cherminisky, the Dean of Berkeley School of Law, and Timothy Snyder, author of On Tyranny, and we'll hear from the Dr. Martin Luther King, whose words penetrate in our times. Last Sunday, we were urged to speak when silence feels safer, to stand when invisibility beckons. So, my great thanks to Larry Metzger, to Sherry Kramer, to Doug Dasher, to Adam Wasserman, who will stand and who will speak, each to his or her own experience of our group reading of Cherminisky's No Democracy Lasts Forever. I'm especially grateful to our worship associates, Jill Cowley and Brian Fredrickson, for joining me. And to our tech team, Jim and John and Michael, imaging and recording in the back, our thanks. And to those keeping us safe outside, to the greeters, to the coffee makers, to Jill Fredrickson for dressing our chancel, and to Lydia and Dell, whose music always brings us peace and joy. On your seat, you have a gray hymnal. And we're going to stand as we're willing and able and sing out, "Oh, I Woke Up This Morning," page 153.
I was morning with a mind, stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, stayed on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind, stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I was walking and talking with my mind, stayed on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind, stayed on freedom. Walking and talking with my mind, stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. I was singing and praying with my mind, stayed on freedom. Singing and praying with my mind, stayed on freedom. Singing and talking with my mind, stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, state of freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind. State of freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind. State of freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Woo, yeah.
Whew. Good wake up. Our opening words are loving your enemies. Martin Luther King, delivered at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, Montgomery, Alabama. How you love your enemies is this. When the opportunity presents itself for you to defeat your enemy, that is the time when you must not do it. There will come a time, in many instances, when the person who hates you most, the person who has misused you most, the person who has gossiped about you most, the person who has spread false rumors about you most, there will come a time when you will have an opportunity to defeat that person. It might be in terms of a recommendation for a job. It might be in terms of helping that person to make some move in life. That's the time you must do it. That is the meaning of love. In the final analysis, love is not this sentimental something that we talk about. It's not merely an emotional something. Love is creative, understanding goodwill for all men. It is the refusal to defeat any individual. When you rise to the level of love, of its great beauty and power, you seek only to defeat evil systems. Individuals who happen to be caught up in that system, you love, but you seek to defeat the system.
Good morning. Our chalice lighting reading comes from Reverend Michelle Collins, entitled, "For Those Doing the Work of Resistance, Hopeful and Exhausted." Spirit of community, source of renewal, some days our hearts beat with fire. Plan making, chanting, moving, imagining. Other days, the spark barely flickers. The work seems endless, but we are not. Help us honor the cycle, the surge, the setback, the pause. Teach us to rest without guilt, to act without self-righteousness, to remember that resistance, too, lives in laughter, in tenderness, in song. May this gathering refill what the world drains, so we can return again to the work, still imperfect, still alive, still willing.
Freedom made a state like Maine or Virginia. Freedom made a song, some county line. Freedom is a flame that burns within ya. Freedom is a state of mind. Freedom, 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 freedom. Freedom is a flame that burns within you. Freedom is a state of mind. Ba 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 ba. bop, bop. Freedom ain't a boat like leaving without ya. Freedom ain't across some county line. Freedom is a how ya think about ya. Freedom is a state of mind. Freedom, 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 freedom. Freedom is a flame that burns within you. Freedom is a state mind. You can't get the freedom by riding on a train. The only way to freedom is right on through your brain. Whoa, 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 whoa. Freedom is a notion sweeping the nation. Freedom is the right of all mankind. Freedom is a body's imagination. Freedom is a state of mind. Freedom, 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 freedom. Freedom is a notion sweeping the nation. Freedom is a body's imagination. Freedom is a full-time occupation. Freedom is a state of mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Dell. That was wonderful. I'm Sherry Kramer, and Larry and I started on this journey a few months back. Yeah, months back. So we're here today to share our journey with you. As Unitarian and Universalist, I would say we should never forget that we are part of a dissenting religious tradition. I'm sure all of us have, at times, especially now, when we would like to shout out, "I dissent." When Larry and I started, we were distressed, appalled, dismayed at the undemocratic, authoritarian direction we saw this nation taking. Very far from the nation and the direction that Martin Luther King's dream of justice truly for all. Being former history teachers, we both went to the past first to try to understand the present. In times such as these, looking at some of our establishing documents seemed to be a good direction to take. What were those founders thinking? What were they talking about? What does the Constitution say about democracy? The book we chose was a book called No Democracy Lasts Forever by a legal scholar, Erwin Chemerinsky. And there was a clue to his thinking in the subtitle: How the Constitution Threatens the United States. Whoa. The journey we have taken here in our conversations at UU Santa Fe didn't start with the Constitution. We started by looking, Larry and I, in a group that we gathered together, looking at the little book called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, or 20 Lessons on Tyranny. And then we went on to a series of conversations about some of the causes that seem to be creating our current troubles: wealth bifurcation, corporate media concentration, organized religious right, the emergence of technological oligarchy, and the list went on from there. Now the question emerges: how do we resist the path towards autocracy in our democracy now? So the subtitle on that book really drew us in. One thing that I kind of keep coming back to is that our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is the oldest written constitution in the world right now of any democratic country by more than 100 years, and the very least amended. It takes monumental effort to amend this Constitution, and to be quite honest, I'm not too hopeful that we will be doing it again anytime soon. It didn't have to be this way. Thomas Jefferson made an argument to James Madison. I am increasingly persuaded that the earth belongs exclusively to the living, and that one generation has no more right to bind another to its laws and judgments than one independent nation has the right to command another. He then went on to state that he thought that the governing laws of the nation should be rewritten every generation. For him, that would have been 19 years. For us, it would probably be about 29 or 30, because we live a little longer. Now the question arises, are we up to that task right now? Larry?
I want to thank you, Sherry, for inviting me to help lead these discussions. Only a few months, actually, after I joined the church, but it's been a wonderful experience. Reading and discussing Erwin Chemerinsky's No Democracy Lasts Forever has brought home to me the importance of challenging many components of our national mythology. Martin Luther King and other civil rights crusaders asked white Americans to do precisely this in the hope that we might abandon our deeply rooted delusions about race. In No Democracy Lasts Forever, Chemerinsky asks us to let go of a particularly cherished national myth, that those who wrote the Constitution were an especially wise group of statesmen who were committed to democracy and who thus established a government of the people. Chemerinsky challenges this notion because he is convinced that our quasi-worship of the framers, as well as crucial parts of the Constitution, what he calls, quote, flaws in the foundation, are central to the current erosion of our democratic system and of the attendant expansion of overt white racist sentiments. The underlying problem, in Chemerinsky's view, was the framers' profound distrust of democracy. In fact, it is easy to find examples of this distrust in the writings and statements of those framers. For example, one delegate, Edmund Randolph of Virginia, who helped draft the Constitution, argued that problems of the new nation were a result of, quote, the turbulence and follies of democracy. Another, Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, asserted that democracy was, quote, the worst of all political evils. The next one actually is the most interesting to me. According to John Jay, who subsequently became the first Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, democracy, quote, like pure rum, easily produces intoxication, and with it, a thousand mad pranks and fooleries. Instead of popular government, he preferred an oligarchy of the wealthy, arguing quite baldly that, quote, the people who own the country ought to govern it. Sounds familiar? The result of such sentiments, as Chemerinsky demonstrates, was a system of government that was profoundly undemocratic. To take just one example, unlike the House, in which the number of a state's representatives was determined by its population, in the Senate, each state, no matter how small its population, was allotted 2 senators. In recent years, Southern and heartland states that are more numerous than the more populous, liberal-leaning large states have become largely conservative. Consequently, the balance of power in the Senate has shifted to the right, even though the more liberal states have a larger share of the country's population. Moreover, the original Constitution established a structure of the four branches of the federal government, the House of Representatives, the Senate, the President, and the Supreme Court, only one, the House, was elected by popular vote. The other three were chosen by indirect methods. Although members of the House and the Senate are now chosen by popular vote, the most egregiously undemocratic of those indirect mechanisms, the Electoral College system for choosing the president, still haunts us today. And because the Senate has skewed right, so has the Electoral College. As a result of this anachronistic system, in the last 7 elections, right-wing popular vote losers have twice won majorities in the Electoral College and have thus become presidents. Moreover, Chemerinsky reminds us that if only 43,000 votes had changed in Arizona, Georgia, and Wisconsin, a third popular vote loser would have been elected president in 2020, even though he had received 7 million fewer votes than the winner. Because of the growing ethno-nationalist impulses within the governing party, the right-wing bias in both the Senate and the Electoral College have made it increasingly difficult to preserve the hard-won gains of the civil rights struggle. Thus, these surviving, quote, flaws in the foundation of the Constitution, as well as others, such as the difficulty in amending that document, have helped to entrench the culture of racism that Martin Luther King worked so valiantly to uproot.
We place 4 stones in our candle bowl each week to remind us of 4 deep commitments. The mountain stone reminds us that the land where we gather, called Integua, Ogapoge, White Shell Water Place, is the ancestral home of Tewa-speaking people and their descendants and requires care from all who dwell here. The geode reminds us that the seeds of peace are hidden in every conflict, and we are called to tend these seeds. The fossil stone reminds us that this place was once an ocean and may be one again. Climate change is real, and we need to act to care for this planet where all of us belong. The stone, banded with quartz, reminds us that even when we may seem divided, democracy is real and fragile and worth protecting. May these commitments guide our actions.
Every Sunday, we set aside a time to express communally our joys and our sorrows, with the realization that as we share our joys, they multiply, they get larger somehow, our lives become lighter. And as we share our sorrows, they do become easier to bear. And we have a sorrow in our book this morning from my Brit. This morning, the Episcopal bishop, one of the Episcopal bishops anyway, he made this analogy. He advised his clergy to make their wills. It is time to put our bodies between the vulnerable and power. It is indeed the times of Martin Luther King. Also like to light a candle for the repose of the soul of Mary Nykirk, who recently passed. And our thoughts, our prayers, our comfort goes out to family and friends of Mary. A concern from Ann Urbanski. Our longtime friend Alan Smith has been battling a blood cancer called multiple myeloma for more than 10 years. We just learned that he's now hospitalized with another blood cancer, acute myeloid leukemia. He's been treated at an excellent cancer center in Wisconsin and hopes to start outpatient treatment soon. We send healing thoughts to Al and his family, especially his wife, our friend, Karen. Indeed, we do. And as always, we have a group of visitors with us this morning. If you'd like to raise your hand, let us know where you're seated so we can get to know you a little bit. Please do. We have Rebecca and Tom from Fort Collins, Colorado. We have someone named Galt from Santa Fe. Hi, Galt. Suzanne and Gilbert from Santa Fe. Hello. Bob from Santa Fe. And Rachel, or Raquel, is it from Santa Fe? Rachel? Rochelle from Santa Fe. My apologies. Welcome. We're glad you could join us, and we hope that you will be able to stay with us after the service for coffee. And we got a whole host of other things going on after the service that I'll tell you about later. So meanwhile, let's sing Spirit of Life. It's page 123 in the hymnal if you need the words.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow with the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Today's meditation reading is based on a piece written by my Brit, inspired by John Kabat-Zinn. We invite you now to enter a now of pure awareness, to settle into an awareness that is inhabitable. As you settle into your body, take a deep breath, release any tension, eyes open or closed as you prefer, as we enter together in our time of meditation. We can take up residency in our awareness in this timeless presence and be at home. We can live here. It is called now. It is already ours, the shared actuality with all beings. So we can be at home, releasing the self into this fullness. We can listen deeply. This awareness is not my awareness or yours, but a manifestation of the deepest reality. Invite yourself to be fully present. Then it becomes obvious you yourself are whole, and at the same time, you are part of large and larger spheres of wholeness, the universe, all of it. And so, in that interconnectivity, not only belonging, but compassion pours out. And from that interconnectedness, a caring, so we can be of use in the manifestation of suffering, and in the body politic, a recognition of responsibility to conserve, preserve the dignity of that interconnectedness of being so as to act, to minimize harm and recognize that we ourselves may cause harm when we're caught up in the story of me. Our sitting, our being, is a radical act of love, a radical act of wisdom, a radical act of sanity. As we breathe together, we conspire together in as beneficial way as we can. How to breathe, how to love, how not to differentiate those unlike ourselves, how to take a stand in the service of compassion.
These passages from the letter from the Birmingham jail are familiar and beloved by many of us. The Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. So I've tried to make it clear that it's wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. But now I must affirm it is just as wrong, or even more so, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. More and more I feel people of ill will have used time more effectively than the people of goodwill. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. And where are we silent? King asks, behind the doors of our churches. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent beneath the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. Taken from Stoneyard Devotional by Charlotte Wood, when you're inside a church, I've come to realize it's impossible to see out. There are no clear windows. Light streams in through the stained glass, making colored lozenges on the floor, but everything outside is invisible. Save a rippled blur seen through the water, colorless diamonds interspersed with red or yellow or indigo. The only way to see the world beyond the church is through the door, in or out. And our attention to this outside is one of the most sacred gifts we can offer. This focus, inside, outside, is taken up one more time by Martin Luther King. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The urge for freedom will eventually come. This is what has happened to the American Negro. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him he can gain it. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can't be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. And this is the interrelated structure of reality.
Good morning. Yeah, my name's Doug Dasher, and I want to thank Sherry and Larry for putting on the discussion courses, which are very interesting, though we're living through the history, which isn't that, didn't plan to do that, but you can't escape it. For that, what I wanted to do was, one is, Sherry had mentioned our Constitution is the oldest and also the least amended. And the Constitution has had 33 amendments proposed, but only 27 passed. Now, talk about a laborious process. Consider the 27th Amendment, which is preventing Congress from voting itself an immediate pay raise. They were supposed to vote on it and then go get elected again if the people choose to elect them. Well, that sounds simple. You should be able to do that. James Madison, in fact, was the one that proposed that on September 25th, 1789, and he didn't live long enough to see that amendment fulfilled. It was ratified on May 7th, 1992, 203 years after Madison proposed it for that. Where, on the other hand, the New Mexico Constitution, since stated in 1912, has had 172 amendments, a much more flexible document, but not probably overly flexible, which some people are concerned about. Now, then Martin Luther King, in his 1963 I Have a Dream speech, said this about our Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, that in a sense, we've come out to the nation's capital to cash a check. And this was in front of the reflecting pool and that in the Lincoln Memorial. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. And now we're still waiting for the cashing of the promissory note for all the people. And Chemerinsky has reported in the unprecedented actions that this administration is currently taking in expanding executive power, resulting in numerous legal challenges. And one of the concerning things is that 21 of the 23 emergency cases on executive power before the Supreme Court, 21 of those have prevailed for the Trump administration. And Chemerinsky essentially said, this casts doubt on whether our constitutional safeguards will hold. But one good thing is public opinion is shifting slowly, but it's shifting where polls show a majority of Americans, around 56%, believe we are in a constitutional crisis, and 65% favor replacing the Electoral College with popular vote for presidential elections. And that was from back in, seems a long time ago now, June of 2025. And hopefully those will continue to increase. So right now we are in need of a serious dialogue about where our society is headed and how do we address our constitutional crisis, especially as Americans again face dark clouds of fascism. And it seems like we've been trying to bury that on multiple times in the past and part of our history. But right now, I think it's a national dialogue will take time, and we have little of that in 2026, where our focus, I believe, has to be on protecting the voting integrity, which is now being challenged by this administration, and elect representatives sharing our democratic values in the 2026 midterms and 2028 presidential election. Thank you.
You know, many of you out there this morning, you were part of our group. And thank you. And I want to acknowledge that. So there are not only the speakers today, but many of you who join me in thanking Larry and Sherry. Who'd have guessed we'd have such a lively conversation for 6 weeks on the Constitution? So picking up from my point, Larry's and Doug, they brought up the flaws of the Constitution, which for me was a real eye-opener. The Electoral College, the Senate, the number of reps in the House of Representatives. But that's where I was most disturbed. The number, and also the means by which they were chosen. Gerrymandering, redistricting. Texas recently produced 6 more Republican seats, California soon to follow suit. And I suppose they'll select Democrats yet. But what happens to those whose votes are thereby diminished, if not excluded? Are these moral means having an immoral end? John Adams wrote in 1776 that a representative assembly, today's House of Representatives, should be in miniature an exact portrait of the people at large. Considering our ethnic diversity, we're far from mirroring, and even the number seems unfair. Wyoming, 2, California with 60 times more population, also 2. Gerrymandering redistricts, sometimes by party, sometimes by race. Yet the Supreme Court has decided gerrymandering is not within its purview. As to redistricting, which, by the way, is required every 10 years by the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we learned fairness may be put aside again by racial bias. The Supreme Court stymies justice. For to prove racial bias, we have to prove the intent to be racially biased. Now, how do you prove an intention racist? As Martin Luther King suggested, perhaps it's the system we must defeat. In the spirit of the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, Article 1, to ensure that congressional districts are aligned with the population, supposing we increase the number of those admitted to the House of Representatives so the number from each state is proportional to its population. Numbers surely are neutral. But then, where would so many of us assemble? Well, Sherry was laughing when she proposed it, but I think it's a great idea. You know that ballroom Trump is building in the White House? I'll betcha they could all meet there.
Good morning. My name is Adam Wasserman. Well, as I know from talking to many of you that quite a few of you know well that losing your faith can be painful. Losing the faith that you were brought up in can leave you adrift and without a community. But I think many of you also know that it can be the beginning of wisdom and sometimes of a new and deeper faith. Now, I bring this up because our friend, Mr. Chemerinsky, points out that one of the grave dangers facing our country is that we Americans have over the years acquired a faith a quasi-religious faith in this old document, the Constitution. We revere it and the mythical founders who wrote it so much that we shy away from any suggestions of change. One of the signs of this is that many of today's jurists, including most of the Supreme Court, are in the grip of a theory of originalism that says we must only interpret the Constitution in the exact way it was understood when it was ratified, shackling us tightly to attitudes and ideas from 250 years ago. Now, look, I think a certain amount of deference is probably good for any constitutional system. Nobody thinks we should change fundamental laws willy-nilly. And to be fair, by many measures, the United States has had a pretty good run. Under this Constitution, we became the world's richest, most powerful country. We survived civil war, depression, 2 world wars, and a Cold War. We've expanded rights for women and African Americans and legalized same-sex marriage. So these successes reinforce this faith that many has in the Constitution. But what Chemerinsky taught us, however, is that today our luck has run out, because there are very serious flaws in the Constitution that are being ruthlessly exploited to rule undemocratically. And we see this now at work every day. The unchecked pardon power that lets a president set his friends and supporters free, the Electoral College, which is a relic of slavery, giving victory to losers of the popular vote, a partisan Supreme Court with justices who serve for life, a terrible error that somehow 49 out of 50 states avoided imitating in their constitutions, an undemocratic Senate, a poorly written and badly interpreted Second Amendment that has opened the doors to untold violence, and much more. Now, that Americans have not fixed these flaws in the Constitution would baffle the people who wrote it. They knew they were doing something no one had done before. They knew they would make mistakes. They knew people's views of right and wrong would change. I think the many deists and Unitarians among our founders would be particularly appalled at our today's unreasoning fealty. Where do we start? Well, Martin Luther King offers a model. He had what I would describe as a love-hate relationship to the Constitution. He knew its flaws perfectly well, but he also knew that attacking it and the founders would backfire. So he learned to wrap civil rights in the flag, and especially in the Declaration of Independence and its claim that we are all created equal. In this, King followed the example of Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln spoke against slavery before the Civil War, he didn't invoke the Constitution, which at that time expressly allowed for slavery. He looked past it to the Declaration. When at Gettysburg, Lincoln begins by saying 77 years ago, the date he points to is 1776, not 1787. Neither King or Lincoln made the mistake of worshiping the Constitution. Instead, they look to basic moral principles which come first and require the Constitution to change. Today, we must convince our fellow citizens to do the same. We must convince them to give up their faith in hopes of a new and deeper faith. Okay, to help with this, we're planning to continue with our discussion groups. So I want to say this winter, focusing on some solutions to the current crisis. And we're going to read the recent book, Abundance, and talk about whether this is an approach that might appeal across our partisan divides. And we're going to look at citizens' assemblies and other ways ordinary citizens can work together to debate important issues and influence decisions. And I hope you can join us. Our first meeting will be Thursday, February 12th. And now we will sing hymn 151, I Wish I Knew How.
I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things I could say. Say them loud, say them clear, for all the world to hear. Say them loud, say them clear, for all the world to hear. I wish I could share all the love in my heart. I know all the boys that keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be free. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. Then you see and agree everyone should be free. Wish I could give all the love in the give. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things I can do, though I'm way overdue. I'd be starting anew. Now way overdue. I'd be starting anew. I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I will to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free. Then I'd sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free.
There's a crack in the world where light finds its way through, not wide, not welcoming, just enough. The seed arrives on wind, lands in darkness between stone and stone, and begins its work in secret. Roots press downward through grit and shadows, seeking moisture in places meant to be barren. They do not ask permission. They do not apologize for their hunger or their being. Slowly, the green crown pushes upward, meeting resistance at every fraction of an inch. The concrete does not yield willingly. It groans, it cracks infinitesimally, but the stem continues. What emerges is not delicate in the way we imagine delicacy. It is yellow and honest, opening its face to the sun despite the hardness all around. Cars pass, feet land nearby. The flower remains, making its small declaration that life persists, even where it is told it cannot. That softness breaks what hardness cannot bend. That beauty grows not in spite of the cold and unrelenting pavement, but directly through it, transforming a barely visible crack into a doorway. When the blossom fades, it does not disappear. It transforms into a constellation of possibilities. Each seed carries the memory of stone splitting, the knowledge that what seems permanent can be challenged and broken through.
We're going to keep that flame burning. And Dell's going to sing our last song from Les Miserables.
Will not be shamed again when the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drum. There is a life about to part when tomorrow comes. Will you join in our program? Who will be strong and stand with me, with him? What happened? Where are you? Where is that? Our music is way messed up. Our crusade, who will be strong and stand with me? Beyond the barricade, is there a world you long to see? So join in the worker will better be free. Do you hear the people singing the songs of angry men? It is the music of the people who will not be slaves again. When the beating of your heart echoes the beating of the drum, there is a life about to come when tomorrow comes.
We extinguish this flame, but not the flame in our hearts that we carry out into the world.
All right, before we adjourn, I have a couple of announcements that they're short. If any of you had questions that may have arisen in your minds as you heard the presentation this morning, our presenters have agreed to stay after the service, so come on up and greet them. Even if you don't have a question, come on up and greet them. Jim Kramer has, since a lot of us are dressed up in our civil rights finery, Jim Kramer would like to have a group shot of everybody. And then after the service, Jim is going to be out here in the foyer. So if any of you would like to have a single shot or, a shot of you and your significant other, he'll be there to take those pictures. Thirdly, today is the first of 6 opportunities to engage in conversations with our stewardship committee. We have up to 4 more seats for today's conversation. It's going to occur in the library with a light lunch. So there's 4 seats left, and if you're hungry, you might want to sneak in there. Let Roberta know she's out in the foyer, or Bev Hope. I believe she was here, but she must have gone out there as well. Let them know you're coming. And if you'd like to sign up for a later discussion, please talk to Bev Hope or Roberta Armstrong and sign up today, or you can sign up online using the link in the email that was sent to members and friends. And Roberta, if she's not busy enough, is also busy getting ready for Mardi Gras. And she will be out there again in the foyer to talk about those other things. And Mardi Gras if you have any questions about that fundraising event that's coming up, and that's a whole heck of a lot of fun. So with that, if you would rise, please, and grab the hand of someone near you, and we'll close with our benediction. Repeat after me, please. May love and skill be in our hands. May love and courage fill our hearts. May love and wisdom light our minds. May love flow through us and walk among us. As we live our lives and work to heal our world. Amen. Shalom. Blessed be. Assalamu alaikum. Hashay. Aho. Thank you, folks.
Thank you for joining us today, friends. We hope that you enjoyed today's service. Please take a little time and explore our website and visit our online welcome table if you'd like to know more about us. Otherwise, we'll see you next Sunday morning. Stay in touch and be well.